my heart is a flame that is arising, and like my being is like, it's like steam coming off of a teacup right now. That feeling, that glorious, beautiful feeling of being in tune with presence and the abundance and having your heart and mind connected, that's what I wanted to come through this book, because I feel like that feeling is what someone needs to be able to really work these ideas into their life.
Greetings, future fossils. This is Michael Garfield welcoming you to another episode of the podcast that explores our place in time. This week's return guest, Cory Allen, who some of you may remember from way back in the dawn age of Future Fossils, episode 16, has just released a fabulous book on Tarcher Perigee, Now is the Way, an unconventional approach to modern mindfulness. And while I suspect that the use of the word unconventional in the subtitle of this book is a marketing ploy, the fact of it is that this is a really excellent text about what are very time-honored, transculturally tested techniques for becoming more aware and, by extension, more at home in one's life. I've been on Cory's show a few times also, so if you look at the show notes, you'll find links to every appearance of his on Future Fossils and every appearance of mine on his show, The Astral Hustle. But just as every moment is a fresh opportunity for a renewed encounter with the mystery of our world, so too is this a fresh and standalone discussion about what sets Cory's work apart from the countless other mindfulness proponents throughout history. His own relationship to time, biography, identity, his thoughts on music, and I think music plays a really valuable role in this discussion as a working metaphor for a myriad of different relationships to time and the present. And, you know, as someone who's known Cory for a while and has witnessed his initiation as an author from the cheap seats over here, I'd like to acknowledge and bear witness to a remarkable development and evolution in character that I've seen him go through over the last few years. And I think that this book really exemplifies how much more deeply he has become anchored in his heart and in his practice since we have met one another. And so it's a real treat to bring this episode to you. But first, I want to thank from the depths of my being everyone who is supporting this show on Patreon. That includes new patrons, Mark Haberlin, Simon Buck, Andy Filipiak, Zane, and Brian, as well as David Campbell, who raised his pledge this month. I will continue doing everything I can to reward and express my gratitude to everybody who is supporting this show. Within the last couple weeks, I've put out secret episodes, I've put out exclusive music. I am preparing to drop a bunch of extra goodies on everyone as well. Regular support of Future Fossils to the tune of $2, $5, $10 a month is basically what keeps this show alive, in spite of the fact that I have no free time anymore. And that lately, with all of the changes that have been going on in my life, I've had to jettison a lot of the person I used to be and the things that I used to do in order to accommodate a new job and a new child. And this show is something I really, really desperately do not wish to have to lay down. It's more obvious to me how these conversations benefit other people, often people I haven't ever met. It's a lot more clear-cut than some of the other loose threads in my life, that this one deserves to continue being braided into that great tapestry that we're all involved in. So anyway, if you listen to this show and you've been thinking about taking the plunge, that makes it sound a lot more intense and dramatic than it actually is. If you've been thinking about supporting the show at all, now's your time. Thank you so much. And I remain open to everyone's feedback, your thoughts, concerns, criticisms, requests for this show, because it's not just my show, it's our show. I feel very much in service to everyone here in this work. So feel free to write to me, futurefossilspodcast@gmail.com, or join the Facebook discussion group. We have about 2,000 people in there, and there's always cool, interesting stuff getting shared, and it's a real honor to facilitate those discussions also. And with that, I release you into the now, the wow of now, with Cory Allen discussing meditation and music and the profound spiritual practice of coming home to that which you thought you had transcended. It's a great discussion. I'm glad I get to share it with you. Thanks for listening, and I will see you next week. Let's just dive into it.
Yeah, let's do it.
I want to start where, by pouring one on the ground for what Future Fossils claims to be about, right? Which is, frankly, I didn't go back and listen to our first recording to prepare for this, but I do remember there being a playful challenge issued to the idea of at all living in the past or the future. And given that your book makes it very clear that now is the way, I think it's important to make a distinction about, and as you do in this book, about the quality, the duration, the depth, the breadth of now, and how, given that you and I agree that past and future are basically just concepts that arise in the endless open sky of original awareness, I'm curious just to I'll let you wax on the now and how you imagine past and future might fit in there, and what specifically are the qualities of the now that you are attempting to direct people's attention into with this work and its attendant practices.
Yeah, well, first off, just thank you for actually reading the book. I very much appreciate that. I know it's tough to get around to books, and as a podcast host, there are many that come flying your way, I have no doubt. And then even before that, first and then whatever's before one, what's kind of wild is that you said, you want to pour one out for the name of the podcast because of our initial conversation and then so forth. But what's funny is that by talking about that then and having that initial challenge about how there is no future or past and there's only nowness, and then that arising now means that the actual idea of the future fossils concept in the beginning was just played out.
Yeah.
So we both did it. They coexisted. We made the future and the now coexist. Oh, it just took 4 years for it to all come back around and connect to itself. I hope that makes sense. So as far as the nowness goes and what I'm directing people towards, there's as you well know, there's just a rich depth to conscious awareness and experience. And any of those moments in life where you feel an individual feels tapped in to where all things feel synchronous and the wattage is turned up, you feel that everything is in its right place, you feel connected, you feel well and optimistic, and just that full bursting sensation of what I think a lot of people tend to label something like bliss or feeling home or feeling grace or something like that. I discovered along the way that that feeling, that sensation of present awareness and the connection with the arising of your consciousness and it feeding forward into life, into the world, and then the world feeding back into you and so on, and just being in that sync, that is available to all of us all the time. And it's waiting for us. It's sort of like, if you think about, in a lot of ways, like if you were to take a psychedelic journey and people think, wow, that's a far out space, man, to be in. But that space is always there. It's just a click on the radio knob of your mind, one level, one station over. But that ecosystem is always right. It's a layer of universe and reality that is always happening. We're just not tuned into it. And I think that I know for a fact that now is the same way. Presence, that abundance of the richness feeling of being alive is available to us. We just have to continue to remember it, direct our focus to it, and then learn the tools and the practices that we can use to return to that space. Because the more that we can be in that space, oddly, the more that we actually are able to author our future and are able to shape what will come next. Because if you're not present-minded, if you're lost in a reverberation, this endless momentum of distraction, where due to often to technology or just the complexity of our modern world, we are often fragmented with our attention being pulled in every single direction. We're away from ourselves, and we end up getting into this habit of just reacting based on our programming, based on our past experiences. And we, rarely take a moment to pull our heads up from below the water and say, wait a second, I'm being an echo right now. I'm just echoing out my history aimlessly into the future. And whenever you begin to reel yourself back into the present, you are able to begin responding to your life instead of reacting to it. You begin to have an agency. You begin to be able to set your intention and follow that intention through in the things that you say and the things that you do, how you treat other people, and how you build the pathway for yourself for which you will walk into the future. So by being more present, by existing with a higher self-awareness and a deeper connection to what is, you are able to walk forward into what you want to be.
Listening to what you just said, or rather sitting with the neuronal residue of something that I remember as being something you just said right now, one thing I'm noticing in both your writing and in this conversation is this tension between presence, between a deepening awareness, mindfulness of that which is, and also a sense that this is a presence for something. That you spend a lot of time in this book looking at habit formation and encouraging the formation of healthy, beneficial habits, and yet that's a tension between this. I mean, it seems as though that's like a ladder from people's anxious, goal-oriented way of navigating the world and into something else. But like I'm reminded of years ago when Duncan Trussell was on Joe Rogan talking about yoga class and how a lot of people come to yoga for the first time because they want to see butts. And then it becomes something else, And I think actually you and I have talked about this and about skillful means and about how the goals change, and the motivation for practice changes as one deepens in practice. But I'd love to hear you speak to the simple fact that this is a book for people, people interested in achieving results, and how that tension manifests for you and in the way that you approach this, the delivery of these insights.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the reason why I think that habit formation and those type of different practices are really useful is because they're setting you up with a scaffolding for your future, essentially. And so much of what we experience is based upon our, quote unquote, instincts or just our behavioral patterns. And a part of increasing self-awareness is recognizing how you can make those behavioral patterns be shaped like something that you want, And so instead of just being chaotic and whatever and having no real as you said, no ladder to crawl up into the future. I think that by creating a good foundation, what you're doing is setting yourself up for success. And in my experience, those things grow into who you are. It's just like someone, if they're, I suppose if you have never exercised before and then you start going on walks every night or something very simple like that, and you realize, oh, this feels pretty good. And maybe the first month or something, it's a thing where you have to remember, like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and just go another walk. I've been feeling better. Go on another one. It's nice outside. And then, several months go by, and going on walks at night just becomes a part of what you are and who you do. So by building some of those good constructive habits into your life with intention, you can then mold them into what you eventually can become into the future. And it's an interesting way to link these modifications of a deeper part of yourself, in the sense of that ingrained, inherent Michaelness can be shifted and molded, I think, through doing that.
There's in that gap there, I mentioned that it seems that this book fits into a genre. And the last book that I read in this genre many, many years ago was Eckhart Tolle's Power of Now. And there is a pretty significant difference between that book and this book, and that difference is cell phones.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there's another slice, another angle to the conversation around time and attention that we can take here. And I think that angle is you address in great depth and very articulately in this book the way that, as you were talking about, you mentioned it just a moment ago as the chaos. The chaos is as I understand it, our attention restricted in its temporal horizon, that we lose the ability to notice, to detect, and to steer the patterns of our lives. And I don't know that I'm asking for an elaboration on this stuff from your book, but I'm just curious what you think about how, over the last 10, 15 years that you and I have been coming up in this world, there was a lot of talk about the acceleration of things, but then there's also this sense that the digital extends our sense of history and futurity. And there's a subjective quality to the passage of time that seems to be both speeding up and slowing down. And I'm curious how you feel that starting a practice in this kind of a transitional moment historically is different than it would have been for someone like when you started meditating, or how you imagine it might be different when we're sort of even more deeply embedded in this technological surround.
Yeah, that's a great thought, man. And it is true. And that's one of the things that, people have asked me a lot about is like, well, what makes this modern? I'm like, well, and you just nailed it right there. It's like, I'm addressing what it means. A lot of the great works about this type of thing, this genre, something like Be Here Now or Power of Now or whatever. Those books or Alan Watts addresses some of this stuff. Like those books are 20 to 50 to 60 years old, And so what makes it modern is, as you said, I'm talking about this stuff and what it means to be a person alive today and how to deal with these new problems that over that last 10 or 15 years, along with the evolution of technology has come the evolution of all of these new problems that have come from them. And whenever I started meditating, it was very I figured it out and learned it out of books that I read and compiled many, many different sources of information, many different techniques and styles, and tried them out. But that was before YouTube. That was, I was a teenager. That was before the internet was really even popping to any degree. In the 90s, it was there, but it wasn't like anything like it is now. And so ultimately, I think that to your question today, in this modern world, the issue is that now people really, they have a lot more excavation to do from the start. There's a lot more tense issue and soil that's been poured on top of the standard human condition package that you have to work with. It's one of the reasons I found it important to focus on this stuff, and the anxiety issue, the depression issues that come from all of this. Like, technology is incredible. It's unbelievable. It's like beyond magic, right? It seems impossible, like what we are living through right now with the growth of technology. But with that, with the growth of anything, like any battery, to have energy, it needs a positive and a negative side. And unfortunately, the negative side of this immense digital connectivity and resource of information, as you said, time, space, genre, everything has just collapsed. It's all been smashed into essentially a singularity of data. Because you even just look at something like music. Like back in the day, it was like, okay, well, you want to hear a new album, you wait till the release day, then you go out and buy a record or a CD or something like that. And then you listen to that one for, oh, cool, I got a new CD or a new record. And you listen to that from whatever the artist is that you discovered because they are, you encountered them because of your friends or something like that at a certain time in your life. Where now it's like, oh, I can hear some funk music from Lagos from like 1970 instantly. That would have been trapped in space and time. Like, that would have been trapped in Africa in the 1970s on like 100 acetate LPs or whatever that were, or the master 2-inch tapes or something, and no one would have ever really heard that very much. But now it's like, okay, you can just zap to then and there and listen to that within 5 seconds of having the idea to even listen to that. It's insane, right? So if you look at the fact that all information relatively has been smashed and collapsed, and just everything is just this infinite stream of happening. Yeah, man, it's incredible. But what it does is it really rocks our experience and like our understanding and how we can relate to what we're even experiencing. Like, where is our space and time? What is our moment? Well, it's transitory. It's like, well, that's true. But no one has read all the philosophy to prepare themselves to deal with that truth, right? And so it's like, that's one of the great insights I had from my podcast, was like, I started talking about the challenges and just kind of human condition experiences that I had growing up. And I had so many people, listeners, hitting me back and saying like, man, I'm experiencing this too. I'm experiencing this. And it made me realize like, oh, wow, these are universal human experiences. And I never thought that so many people like dealt with the ideas of something like meaning, or like finding that space where you wake up to realizing like, okay, everything is infinity, and I have this subjective agency amidst the self-organizing chaos of being. So if that's the case, then like, what is good and bad, and like what has purpose? Like all those type of questions that I went through a lot of hell. I call my existential paralysis, phase. And I just heard so many people hitting me up saying I'm in that now, where I went through that, and it made me realize like, oh wow, people are being, because of technology, people are being shoved into those predicaments without any of the language, any of the context, any of even the idea that that's what they're dealing with. But it is. And so it's a bizarre time. I think that if you look at the evolution of philosophy and just kind of culture side by side, you think about, okay, so in the, mid 1950s, 60s, 70s, whatever, you have a real big resurgence of kind of postmodernism and whatnot, and that stuff was all great at the time. You have someone like Derrida or Jean-Paul Sartre or someone like that saying like, okay, everything is subjective, there is no meaning. You have Camus saying essentially like, fuck it, like nothing matters, do whatever you're gonna do. You know what I mean? And like that's a necessary place to get to. But the issue is that, like any discipline, you have to keep learning, keep integrating, keep flowing, and like, okay, well, what is the next step? And there is that. I think that shattering of whenever the kind of the seismic waves of postmodernism flowed into culture, and finally, then as the internet arose, it had this weird harmonic result by those two things interacting, because now you've got people looking into their laptops, into their phones or whatever. I love, as you put it, the glass age. We're in the glass age, and people are seeing this, they're in this echo chamber of their own bias, and one of the scary existential monsters that's being, that's surprising people is that, like, you really, for the first time in history, get a truer sense of just how many people exist, because you know what I mean? Like, go to YouTube, go to Reddit, go to Twitter. It's like there's millions and millions of comments that you can see. And it's like, whoa, I am one of, like, not, I had the idea, the concept that I was one of billions of people, but now here's all of their thoughts. And most of the cute individualistic things I thought of, someone posted about this on Reddit in 2012. Like, this is like what's happening, right? So that really gives people that, those type of vibes and forced awareness that's arising in people, mixed with this postmodern hangover that everyone that's kind of out there in the world, makes it where people are very challenged. They're like, okay, I am insignificant, in quotes, and nothing matters, and we're just in this blue marble in the middle of infinity. Like, what the fuck? How could I not be anxious and depressed? And that's why someone like Jordan Peterson skyrocketed to fame, because he came around and said, no, postmodernism is bullshit, and you have to find meaning. And that's why his whole thing was purpose and meaning and discipline. And now he was trying to correct postmodernism, and that's why I think that he became so popular. So we're in a weird time. And so people are starting there. You know what I mean? And so the fact that I was starting with just general environmental and spiritual suffering in the 90s, and in working, meditation was really useful to me to work through my traumatic experiences, to begin to connect my heart mind to my monkey mind, and begin to learn how to deconstruct my suffering, to walk into a future that was more peaceful and heart forward in the way that I knew was possible. But nowadays people are starting with all this other stuff piled on top, and I think it's really important to have conversations like this and things like that to help people realize what they're dealing with nowadays.
Yeah, you make a mention in this at some point about how we're used to adding things. I don't know if I can find this page, but you talk about, in your section on, I think it was ditching the infinite to-do list, you talk about that abundance that we're surrounded by, that normally our filters occlude for us, that we're in an era now where it's becoming more obvious that you'll never be able to answer all of your emails. You'll never be able to meet all of your potential lovers, etc. And when I read this, it reads like our historical condition is that we're in a kind of bardo, to borrow that term from the Tibetan Book of the Dead.
Yeah.
That we're in a space in which, like you're just describing, everything is happening at once. And one of the characteristics, and one of the reasons that book was picked up by Leary and Alpert and Metzner and made into, the psychedelic experience, I think it's like, well, the effect that this electronic surround is having on us is a lot like a psychedelic experience, where, like you say in this book, actually, sometimes it's good to subtract rather than to add. And even though you just described this as us adding something on top, what I've noticed is that the more vivid and intense our sensory experiences or our mental experiences, the less room there is for me. The less room there is for a consistent, stable narrative structure, for a guy who has these qualities and not these other qualities. And so, I'm curious, I feel like it may just be because of the functional nature of this book, because of the intended reader, and not wanting to scare someone in the first 20 minutes of their acid trip with talk of non-duality and so on. But I know that as a committed meditation practitioner, you've got a pretty intimate relationship to the no self that arises in these spaces. And I don't know, I was just curious, what you see around this conversation of, rather than being stuff piled on top of us, it being a sort of groundless space where it's not like, like Jordan Peterson provides like a little Prince planet, like a tiny little gravity well that there just is not enough surface area for all of those Jordan Peterson fans. But, but groundlessness and selflessness are things that, again, to bring up that tension, I think that it seems as though there's a point, and maybe you're just leaving this for people to discover on their own, that there's a point at which the goal-oriented, I'm going to be a better person thing kind of polishes off. I don't know. What do you think when I talk about all this?
Yeah, no, well, Daryl, you're really sniffing a lot of good sense there. I totally am talking about the undoing from above ground to you with your ground touching the earth as an approach. I certainly, and I did, and actually in the previous manuscript, I ended with the undoing of the self. And I realized that was, I don't want to, my intention is never to scare people. I don't want to freak people out. All of the thing you just mentioned, I believe that once people begin to go down this road, it will become apparent to them when they're ready, right? And so, yes, saying it's a groundlessness is a very good and very precise way to say it, in my opinion. But groundlessness suggests on a symbolic level to many people an idea of falling, an idea of instability, an idea of not having any connection to like other organic matter. And it can feel disassociative, or it can feel scary or whatever. And I really intend, and as I said, I wrote intensely and complexly about this without any of the love, really, in one of the other versions of this book. But once I wrote a version, which is basically exactly what you're asking about of the book, I realized that, this was from the mind, and this is not what I want to, it doesn't serve the highest, the most high-minded approach to achieving what I want to achieve with this. It more serves my own self-enamorment for the fact that I can articulate these very nebulous, challenging, hard to talk about states in a very convincing and detailed way. And so that's whenever I say that, I may have even said this to you before, that version of the manuscript was kind of bratty. That's what I mean. Because it's like, you know what I mean? It's like, ooh, like how cute I am that I can talk about this stuff and be fearless and whatever. But as fun as that might be, I think that a thing for me was whenever I really, after I got done with that version, I realized that, this is what I often hate in books, is whenever something is so complex and so heavy that you have to already pretty much know everything in the book to even be able to really get into it when you read it. And it becomes this masturbation session for the author and a few other people who already have most of those ideas. It's like it offers perspectives on complexity that, are different perhaps, and that's about it. And whenever I, through a consistent path of like being humbled by myself, by my own expectations, by my own ideas, by just external circumstances, and of course always just like scraping at the cavern of myself and my heart, trying to get deeper into it all, I had this great realization of like what I'm trying to, ultimately the kernel of what I'm trying to put through the book anyway, is like the feeling I have, that no state, that no mind feeling you're talking about, where it is like I am and I touch on that, in a subtle way in the meditation practice I call the watcher in the book. I do identify it so that it isn't missing, but I don't make it scary. I try and talk about it in a positive way, because it is a positive thing eventually, but that feeling whenever you're there with presence, not necessarily of the awareness of the thinking of I am a Michaeling right now. It's like I am here. There is this agency, and my heart is a flame that is arising, and like my being is like, it's like steam coming off of a teacup right now. That feeling, that glorious, beautiful feeling of being in tune with presence and the abundance and having your heart and mind connected. That's what I wanted to come through this book, because I feel like that feeling is what someone needs. It's what a stranger needs to be able to really work these ideas into their life, open up to them, and actually begin to benefit from them. Because I don't want to talk about things, and I have so much in the past. I don't want to talk about things that are just dense and self-serving. I really want to make it where anybody can they can feel less pain, man. They can feel less fear, and they can start to feel comfortable in their skin and feel optimistic, and figure out ways to, and have the tools provided to them so that they can walk into their everyday normal life and have a better human experience. And it took a lot of like shattering of my brattiness and like that part of my creative ego that feels like it's like fun to have the fireworks going off. Like, I know you love that as much, maybe more than I do. Like, it's like such a fun thing. And it is fun, but to me, like, what is the higher purpose I can serve here? And I wouldn't say quote unquote higher purpose in a contrived way. I genuinely mean that. And I had kind of like what I call a dumb insight, which was like, oh, if I want people to feel it, like I've got to feel it first. I've got to put myself there when I'm writing. So my practice for writing this version of it's like, if you're going to record a take with your guitar and it's all coming from the head, like that's going to have a sound, and you can mimic the emotive nature of what you're playing. You can kind of pantomime it. But if you're feeling it, if you wake up one day or it's like 3 a.m. and you're deep in the zone and you go deep into that zone when you're playing your guitar and you're there with it, man, flaws and all, that take is it's charged. It's a static charge of soul and moment, and Michaelness is like coming through, and you can't capture that all the time. It's everything that has to be aligned to get that into the music. That's why great songs last forever and like make us feel these amazing ways every time. It's because the artist was there. That's why like Dali's paintings look crazy and make you look beautiful and make you feel that surrealness because he was living in that world, and so on. That's Hemingway makes you feel bold because he was a bold drunk motherfucker, And so I really wanted to put that heart mind into the book, man, because I feel like that's what I could do. And so I would meditate, I would do my morning routine, go running, and I'd meditate for half an hour and then go straight into writing for like 4 or 5, 6 hours every day, because I just wanted to bring that afterglow into the pages and really try and provide, kind of I don't know, man. I'm an optimist, and I'm sure at some point, you and I have talked so much over the years that I'm sure at some point I've mentioned my idea of the upside of impermanence. It's like all of the scary, waggly, gnashy, teethy things in our consciousness and in life, they all have a polarity, Like I was talking to Aubrey the other day, and he was like, yeah, the only truth, or something like that one of my maestros or shamans told me back in the day was the only thing you can't fix is dead. And I was like, yeah, you can, with birth. It's like there's always I was joking about a supercut of like caskets closing and babies being born. It's like, that's how you fix death, is that other people are born. And so like there's always an upside to something. And so, given like, for example, the idea of impermanence, like you can look at that and it can be scary. It's like everyone everyone you love, and everything you like is going to die and de-evolve and rot into nothingness. But that's one way of looking at it. Isn't very pleasant if you have your emotions connected to that idea. But I look at it and I go, that's true. But for there to be things to always be decaying into nothingness, there must always be things coming into existence. And that's the upside of impermanence. It's like humans, people, we exist in the middle between of the upside and the downside of impermanence. We're coming and going at the same time. We're like, that's what the happening is, right? And so I choose to articulate those ideas of like selflessness or the void or oblivion or any of those existential crises, any of those things that all of us face or struggle with at some point, from the mind of like the heart afterglow and the like, hey, okay, here's an issue, but here's the smiling kind of positive way that we can deal with it and work through it and continue living without being decimated or seduced by our own ability to complexify the human condition.
Do you still make music? You talk about how it used to be an obsession for you, but it was, it's in your backstory section where you're talking about what an angry fucker you used to be and, how you were just like very cynical and, kind of monomaniacal. And yet, I mean, I know that you continue to produce audio, but I'm listening to you talk about impermanence and about cycles of arising and decay and so on. I'm curious whether this is something that you find in practice as a musician, even if just for yourself.
Yeah, what's interesting is that, like, man, as I can write about and just as we have like personally talked about, I was so like literally OCD about creating music for so long, and at some point, like whenever the last album I made was probably 6 years ago, the proper just album of mine, and it was called The Source, and like all of my music has always been a concept, and I just recently figured this out when I was talking about it, oddly enough, is that my music comes from a conceptual place, like there's a philosophical idea I want to express, and then I come up with the way or the medium in which I want to express it, like what instruments and what structures or compositional rules or techniques could I use to articulate that concept. And as the thing is like getting like the inchworm is kind of half in and half out, when you start getting into the actual creation of the sounds, that is when the concept begins to arise externally, whatever the thing is I'm trying to express, the idea. That is then when I tune in the emotion that concept, me seeing it in the world, makes me feel. So it's a weird like feedback loop thing that starts to happen, right? So I did that, like expressing all these concepts over the course of 10 or 15 years musically. The last one was called The Source, which of course was all about, the all. It's about tapping into that root consciousness, the finger of the divine that's coming up through the puppet of each of our bodies. And what's that?
I just said rawr.
And then, as I was like, after I was done with that record, then I, went and had some deep ayahuasca experiences, really got to high five Source like never before. And after that record came out, I had this like, I don't know, I had this feeling of almost like I almost went back in time by creating that record, where I was like, oh, cool. I'm unborn now. And I just sort of like, I'm here. And I felt like that since then musically. And so I haven't gone to create another record or even tried since then. What I have done is built up a bunch of modular synthesizer stuff, because like I realized that because I could begin to, that's right around the time I started the podcast, was whenever I completed the last record. And so I realized that, I'm now expressing those concepts and those ideas, but now people can actually understand them because I'm just talking about them, as opposed to making music that is metaphorically or symbolically representing these philosophical ideas. And so then, after I started my podcast, things were kind of off to the races. And honestly, I hardly have time or energy. I guess it's more energy now to sit around and like work on a record, because I take my records, I'm a bit more maybe I'm precious, or I take them seriously, or whatever, however you want to look at it. Like I really go all in whenever I'm working on a record, like it consumes me and all my time, and I really want to like take it there. And so I wouldn't ever kind of just be messing with something in the background and all right, that looks good. And I think I should be more like that, honestly. But there's something like I respect about a band or an artist that only puts out an album like every 4 or 5 years. But when they do, it better be a real piece of art, But
right.
But in that, I realized that there's a part of my brain that's made very happy by sounds, like creating sounds, and just that voyage of like just brushing away the edge of the horizon and like, have that feedback loop with sound and having it come forward and controlling it and creating these spaces. I really love that. And so that's why, I've had synthesizers, Moog and various things like that for a long time, over 10 years. But that's why I went and started building. I built a nice modular system, was so that I could make that that's my dreaming space where I can just plug it in. I can fuck around and create the most awesome, electronic, modular, crazy, weird, interstellar, intergalactic sounds. And I can just do it for the sake of doing it and really get enjoyment out of that without it having to go towards something. All of that said, I have been feeling some of the urge again to create another record. And so I think I have I think the concept is arised, and it's going to be eventually sometime whenever I have the space to do it, I'll do more.
Yeah. There's something in that rings real true to me about so I was talking to Android Jones about his virtual reality app Microdose, which are you familiar with this?
I know him, but I don't know the app.
So it's like, rather than painting or sculpting something in virtual reality, you're emitting objects, you're spraying fascinating, mutating particles of stuff, but they fade away. And something that Android said about his heart, mind, and his motivation for that program is people get attached to the creative outcome. This issue of impermanence, that forcing impermanence with them so that they're just there to simply appreciate what's happening as it's happening, releases people from all of the critical self-talk and weird sort of ingrown neurotic bullshit of getting into tilt brush, for example, for the first time and trying to make something cool, trying to make it last. And it's funny how I ask you about your music because there is something about, it's like going home for Thanksgiving and dealing with your family. And I remember when I was a member of the integral philosophy community, that was something that got brought up a lot. Like Ken Wilber and other folks brought that up as the ultimate testing ground for the meditator.
Right.
This is like where you go to find out whether you are able to maintain a sort of witnessing awareness as all of these deeply ingrained habits and programs arise. So I don't know. I think I would just be very curious, because I think a lot of folks, as they move into the mastery of a new mode of being, a lot of that which conditioned or characterized, the skin of the last mode gets left behind. And there's something, there's the Katagiri Roshi's book, You Must Say Something, about how important it is to reach back into that which you were and express it through that which you are. Let me just say that I am enjoying in my abiding the experience of anticipating your next album.
Well, I love that idea, man. That's a really cool notion. The next album's going to be called Home for Thanksgiving, and everyone's going to be like, what in the world? That's a really, really cool idea. And it's interesting, man, is that it sort of has happened, like hands have reached through time at me because of my music. And it's speaking of future fossils, man, it's really kind of bizarre how so one of my records called Pearls came out almost 10 years ago. I think it might have been 10 years ago, 2009, 2010. And the amount of people that I admire or that I have like been fans of musically in my life that have reached out to me and been like, hey, I love this album, like just cold. Like they're people, these are like people that are really well known, like professional artists and musicians. They're like, hey, I just, came across this or someone recommended it and I've been listening to this on loop like for months or whatever. And it's got this feeling of timelessness and blah, blah, blah. That still happens. Like people hit me up like that I really admire and I think are amazing. And like it sort of tweaks my brain. It's like for example, it's how like John Hopkins and I met. It was like the English, electronic musician who's amazing.
I love that guy. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, so several years ago, he just like emailed me and he was like, hey, I know this is kind of weird, but I'm a big fan of your podcast. I love your album Pearls. I've been touring and opening for Coldplay in like an arena tour, and I've been playing your album over the PA as people like enter the stadium. So there's like, just know that there's like 30,000 people every night hearing your album as they file into their seats. And then he's like, and I'm working on some music for meditation, not that I'm going to release, but I'm just working on it. Would you be interested in, would you give me some feedback on my music? Because I love your binaural beats and blah, blah, blah. And so then we just became friends and like started talking. And now we, talk on WhatsApp all the time and have been fortunate enough to get to hang out in person and stuff. And he's just become a good friend. And it's like, it's so weird that an album from 10 years ago, it created this doorway through which that relationship was born in the last couple of years, and stuff like that continues to happen, and so it is kind of weird that you're going home for Thanksgiving dinner, or Thanksgiving dinner's coming for you. You know what I mean?
Well, there's another dimension, which is, well, there's always another dimension, but in this case, it is that it feels like very different music comes out of and for. Like, I like the way that you describe your binaural beats as functional ambient music. That there's a way that it doesn't seem like you're going to get American Pie from a Zen monastery, and it's not to say that there aren't Zen folk songwriters out there. There are many. But, a state of consciousness preoccupied with narrative structure, and a state of consciousness preoccupied with a sort of timeless appreciation of space and the body in space, is like very different kinds of music. And, ultimately, I guess we can really just use all of this as an analogy for this book, which has ostensibly a structure that it is leading people through. But at the same time, when I look at Now Is the Way with a magnifying lens, from the very beginning, it's full of these little micro exercises and poetic passages that are I was like kind of surprised at how gentle and sensuous you are as a writer. That it's very much like you talk in the first few pages about like eating a piece of chocolate, and how it's just like, I was just imagined you in like a flowy robe.
Perfect. And that's how I want you to imagine me.
That's what you were writing in, right? So
definitely, yeah.
But so I don't know if that there's anything to address there specifically, but I do really acknowledge and appreciate the way that you're managing to hold that sense of there being the book is a serial thing, and you're on a conveyor belt, and you're taking someone through a point by point kind of program, and at the same time this program is in its fine grain really, like, you talk about linking moments of presence together. And I think that's it's really kind of a key reconciliation.
Yeah, man. Well, thank you for noticing that. I really, really appreciate that you're able to extract, not surprised, of course, but the fact that you caught everything you just described is really cool to me, because one, you can't have a voice like mine and not be a sensuous, flowy writer. But, both of those things intentionally coexist, the structure and the flowiness, the smoothness, the softness, all of that stuff. I structured the thing intentionally almost like a business book, or it's like, I'm going to like identify the topic. I'm going to talk about, here's a real world example of how you encounter the pain points of this thing. The next step is how you solve those pain points. And then the whole second half is like, how can you work this and put this functionally into your life, build a bridge from like knowing to doing? How can you actually like take this stuff into living with you? And I made it like that because so many books that are philosophical or deal with more intangible ideas or anything like that, man, so many of them, almost all of them really, just kind of like waffle around about ideas, and they talk about the concepts, which is really fun. But I wanted to make it where, okay, let's talk about these concepts, but let's put them into action. Let's build out a map of like, how can you really grab these things and make them a part of your experience? And the feeling that you get from even like the eating the piece of chocolate thing, which I like that you picked that out. Like, that's me. Like, that's what my reality is like maybe what you felt when you read that. And so I wanted to, like, because I feel calm and smooth and comfortable and very at ease in my body and like happy and peaceful pretty much, I mean, most of the time. Of course, I'm human, and there are times where I feel frustrated or stressed, or like, you know, I have a real habit of putting a lot of pressure on myself with things because I want to do my best and all that, you know, all that type of stuff. But my general sensibility is feeling relaxed and happy and excited and optimistic and smooth and whatever. And so I wanted to make that true essence of my being come through, and I wanted the reader to feel like that, because, man, you don't think James Brown felt the way and lived the way you feel whenever you hear those songs? You know what I mean? It's like, you're damn straight. That's why he could make those songs, man. It's because that's how he lived. And that's like Hendrix could make the crazy, crazy sounds and like just do that thing because that's where he was at. That's who he was. And you could feel it in everything in the music. It's like, that's what makes all art great, in my opinion, is whenever you get like somehow the creator of art can externalize that perspective, that feeling of life, of like humanity that we somehow know in some way because it's human, but being able to create and share that vibe with such authenticity and so highly charged that you actually can add that to your map of experiences and you get to feel it. That's like, go listen to a samba song and you feel like, ooh, I feel not like Jorge Ben is one of my favorites. Mm-hmm. You feel nice and beautiful and like you can't not. That dude sings from the bottom of his toes, man. You know, it's like you just smile when you hear his music, and so it's really important for me to put that in there because it's kind of like not only is it how I feel, but I look at it as like it's like a light in the cave. But hey, this is where this stuff got me, and I want you to feel how I feel because I feel good, man. And so that accompanied with a structure that's applicable, I thought would be really effective.
Listening to all of this, I wonder, who is your teacher at this point? And or who are your teachers? Who are the people whose wisdom you find? And obviously you're getting to talk to a lot of them on your show, or there's another sense in which that kind of a question may be almost kind of the wrong question. But I'd be curious, what wells are you drawing your wisdom from at this point in your practice?
So I intentionally cut off reading or listening to podcasts or lectures by anyone who all of us shared as a cultural teacher in these things about a year after I started my podcast, because I thought I have such a respect and integrity for originality and genuine ideas that I decided to cut myself off from those things because I didn't want it to accidentally bleed into what I was talking about or my ways of thinking, because I was really curious, like, who am I? Like, I love Alan Watts, I love Chogyam Trungpa, Thich Nhat Hanh, Ram, all the guys, and then of course all the Western philosophers, and then the Zen writers like Suzuki and all that. So I love all that stuff. I grew up on all that, but I thought, like, I need to stop like drinking from that fountain so I can discover who's in there. Like, and what do I think? How do I approach these things? And what are the things that are meaningful to me? And Yeah, so I stopped intaking stuff from like quote unquote teachers, like classical teachers, because I wanted to really forge my own path of originality. And so I will say, and this will sound, this might even sound corny, but I'll show you that it isn't. My teachers nowadays, like honestly, are everyone else, like people. Every person. And that can sound a little saccharine because it coming out of the mouth of some asshole that's being like, everyone is my teacher. You know what I'm saying? But like, I mean that in the sense of like the embodied experiential nature of everything that you and I talk about all the time. Whenever you are observing how another person that you're engaging with, or even just watching them live their life or like run their script, as I like to think about it, if you're open enough and you're aware enough of what's happening, you can learn from how you are onboarding someone else's behavior, how you're onboarding your engagement interaction with someone else, and how flexible and open you can be to hearing them for the fullness of what they are and who they are. And I mean that in a good way, and letting all that come through and really being there and receiving what it is. Because, as you know quite well, each of us are this unique, we're all the same, but we all have this unique narrative of experience. And like we have this Leary called it the bubble reality. I love that term because it's like we're all looking around at our unique subjective experience of life. We all share the same things, but we're all getting that different impression. So we all have like this whole, I think in the book I kind of refer to this as like the museum of ideas. Each of us are experiencing this whole artistic kind of co-creative world. And if you can just like get yourself out of the way a little bit and listen to that from people, you're constantly learning everything you need to know from a spiritual teaching.
Excellent. So, I like to end these with an invitation to play with some kind of imagined future listener. Sometimes it's somebody born after we're gone. Sometimes it's your own future self. It seems appropriate, given the rest of this conversation, to invite future... You do this in the book, actually, and I was so tickled to see that you invite the reader to imagine themselves 15 years older than they are now, and to really, imagine what your body and outlook will be like in 15 years. What will your face look like? What will the city you live in be like? How might your perspective on the world be different? And I was like, you son of a bitch. This is exactly the shit that you were telling me not to do the first time I talked. But it was actually wonderful because it is kind of step one in lifting people out of that Twitter now, that little fine grained thing. So if you'll indulge me in playing this game, if you listen deeply, if you invite 15 years older Cory into this conversation and listen real deeply, what does he tell you?
So firstly, I think it's important to qualify the looking into the future 15-year thing by saying that I preempt that in the book by inviting the person to think of who they were 15 years ago. And I think that's a really useful way to identify nowness by saying, who were you 15 years ago? What were you like? What did you look like? How did you see the world? What was the wattage on your perception? What were your preferences? What was your living situation? What was technology and medicine and all that stuff like in the world? And then think about the difference between 15 years ago to today. So that gives an individual a real measurable sense of change because they've lived through it. And then I invite the person to say, okay, now that you've done that, now think about 15 years forward. And by doing that exercise, it really sticks your feet in the future, or in the present, and like makes you feel like, oh, wow, that's the wow of now. That's like, oh, holy smokes, I'm this right now. And it's going to be different. And it was different before. I think that in the future, man, if I think about that for me, I don't know, man. 15 years from now, I'll be bald. I envision and hope that I will just continue on this path, but I see myself being incredibly surprised at the incalculable difference of where I end up 15 years from now. I'm 37, so, I'll be in my early 50s. And my real hope, man, is that whenever that Cory in his early 50s shows up, that this thing has just gotten deeper and deeper, and I've figured out ways to continue my intention, like sharing what I'm trying to do, and that's shown up in the form of perhaps more books, perhaps however we communicate, in 15 years, whether it's our microchip nanoprocessor in our brains where we're all psychically connecting. Maybe the binaural beat of the future in 15 years will be everyone has their chip turned on, and I can send vibrational waves to everyone's consciousness like in real time, and we can all tune it up and have like a group sync where we're all feeling delta consciousness, collective consciousness, or something like that. But really, I just hope that it would be such a blessing, and I don't mean that in a religious way. It would be such a divine gift if I could somehow make the same changes in myself from 15 years ago to today, an equal amount of that from now into the future. Nothing would make me more happy, because with every passing day, man, I love people more. My capacity to love people and myself grows. My insatiable curiosity about humanity, what it means to be human as a whole and as individuals, gets deeper and kinder and more earnest. And it would be an incredible gift for that to deepen, because it means that I will be getting to the place that I believe is possible as incarnated consciousness.
Right on. Does 52-year-old Cory Allen have any parting words for all of us here in the present past?
He does. Yeah, he does. He says that try and relax and everything's going to be all right.
Well, all right, Corys. Good talking to all of you. This is Now is the Way, an unconventional approach to modern mindfulness. This really is a book written with the kind of care and sensitivity that you have talked about in this call. It really is, I would say, the narrow end of the wedge, and it's going to reach people, I think, who otherwise might find it really difficult to bootstrap themselves into these practices. And for that, I thank you, sir. And it's been a pleasure to have you back on the show.
Man, well, thank you so much. That means a lot to me. And I love every time we get to talk. I love talking to you. I love the way you think and all of the different ways that you make me think about things. And it's good the world is better for having a Michael Garfield scurrying around inside of it. So thank you for that. Thank you for taking the time to read the book and have me on the show. And I already look forward to next time.
Right on. Thanks for listening to Future Fossils. This podcast is a part of the MindPod network, along with numerous other excellent programs. Go to mindpodnetwork.com and subscribe to them all. If you'd like to help support Future Fossils, consider giving this show a 5-star iTunes review or sharing it with someone you think might appreciate these conversations. For more episodes, show notes, copious extras including music, art, the Future Fossils coloring book and book club, and more, visit patreon.com/Michael Garfield.